Chapter 8. Ostherda's orange sun was setting quickly. Scourge crouched in the shadows of a cramped alley in the warehouse district on the outskirts of Jurunga, the planetary capital, watched it disappear. As darkness fell, the photosensitive street lamps kicked in, casting the entire district in a pale yellow glow. The dim artificial illumination was enough to give Scourge a clear view of the two-story building across the street. From the outside, there was no way to tell that the structure was the Separatists' base. There were no autoguns on the roof. No guards patrolled the perimeter. The loading bay doors were ordinary durasteel, rather than the reinforced kind used to construct blast doors. The windows were blacked out, and several security cams panned back and forth, surveying the street, but neither was unusual for buildings in this district. Instead of military fortifications that might draw unwanted attention, the Separatists relied on anonymity and secrecy to protect them. They would be unprepared for the wrath about to rain down upon them. His comlink beeped softly, followed by Murtaugh's whispered voice. "Team is in position." "Hold until my signal," Scourge replied. "Give me time to take out those cams. Could be droids in there," Sekal chimed in. "Are you sure you don't want Murtaugh's team to go in first and clear the well?" Scourge gritted his teeth. Did Sekal know about Scourge's difficulties in taking down the droids at the UDM plant? Were his words a way of saying, "I know your secrets, I know your weaknesses"? On the other hand, if Sekal was just making a joke based on what had happened on their last mission, then Scourge's paranoid overanalysis meant that the slimy little sycophant had gotten to him. Neither option sat well with the Sith Lord, particularly since he still wasn't sure whether Sekal was trying to get him killed. "Remember the plan," Scourge snapped. "The two of you stay back until I give the all clear. We can't risk a stray blaster bolt taking out our Lord's favorite advisor. Leave the dirty work to me and your team." "Understood," Murtaugh agreed. Keeping Murtaugh out of the battle wasn't the best tactical choice, but it was worth it to keep Sekal away from the action. Scourge didn't need to be looking over his shoulder while he was fighting the Separatists. Plus, Murtaugh would be at a safe distance as well, just in case he turned out to be a co-conspirator. "I'll send the signal once I poke out their eyes," Scourge said, rising to his feet. Careful to stay in the shadows, Scourge crossed the street to the building adjacent to the base and crept around the back. There he located the utility ladder running up the side of the building and climbed to the rooftop, from which he could look down on the roof of the Separatist base. The gap between the buildings was substantial, nearly 10 meters. Scourge measured the distance, took a dozen steps back, then ran to the edge and leapt over the precipice. He pulled his knees up and tucked into a forward roll as he landed, then sprang to his feet, lightsaber drawn and ready. There were 4 cams on the roof, mounted on poles at each corner. In rapid succession, he reached out with the force and snapped them off one by one, sending them tumbling from their perches to shatter on the street below. "Target is blind. Move in," he said into his comlink. In the street below, small squads of Murtaugh's soldiers were approaching the building. Scourge waited while they launched their first volley of flash and stun grenades, followed by a round of suppressing fire as the soldiers took cover positions near the door. From inside came the sound of blaster carbines as the Separatists returned fire. Moving quickly but calmly, Scourge crossed the rooftop to the hatch built into the center. A few seconds later it swung open and a pair of Separatists emerged, snipers coming to the roof to take a position on the attackers below. Scourge hacked down the first with his lightsaber, then grabbed the second by the scruff of his collar and yanked him off. The young human looked at him with abject horror, his panic so great that he never even thought to raise his weapon. The Sith Lord fed on the man's fear, savoring it as the heat of the dark side rushed through him. Effortlessly toting the sniper along, he took 3 quick steps toward the rooftop's edge, then hurled the man over. The sniper's terrified scream was cut short a second later by his fatal impact with the ground below. Scourge turned and raced back to the open hatch. He could hear frenzied shouts and blaster fire. An instant later, an explosion rocked the entire building, followed by several seconds of silence. Another round of blaster fire and shouting confirmed that Murtaugh's team had breached the entrance. Scourge leapt through the hatch leading into the warehouse's upper floor. There were no interior walls. It consisted of a single massive room. In the far corner, a staircase led down to the lower level. A row of mattresses ran along one wall, but the primary purpose of the space seemed to be storage. Crates and footlockers were scattered about, along with a haphazard collection of armor, weapons, and other military equipment. A computer terminal had been set up near the mattresses, along with 4 blank monitors that would once have shown the images from the security cams on the roof. Scourge registered all this without conscious thought. His primary focus was on the 20-odd humans struggling into their combat gear to join the battle downstairs. Unfortunately for them, that was never going to happen. Like a red wind, Scourge swept through their ranks, slashing left and right, hewing off limbs and decapitating bodies. Violent bursts of the force picked his victims up and tossed them around like rag dolls, breaking bones and shattering skulls. The Separatists offered virtually no resistance. They had been caught off guard. They hadn't expected an ambush from the roof. These were not soldiers. They were ordinary men and women who had received only the most basic training when they joined the cause. Scourge's savage and sudden assault, and the bloody carnage he left in his wake, sent them into a panic. He fed on their primal fears. Some he killed, others he left mortally wounded and writhing on the floor, their lives enduring for 30 or 40 agonizing seconds, while their high-pitched cries of pain fueled his bloodlust. Had the Separatists coordinated their efforts into a focused and organized counterattack, they might have been able to challenge him. But they just scattered, running for their lives. Scourge drank in their terror and confusion, and felt the growing power of the dark side. He channeled that power and refocused it, sending it out in waves that rippled across the room, further inciting the panicked retreat of his enemies. When 2 women managed to resist the onslaught of fear and fight back, he was on them in an instant, cutting them down with a few quick slashes of his lightsaber. Everyone else was running. Some fled downstairs. Scourge let them go. They wouldn't get past Murtaugh's team. Others tried to hide, cowering behind crates and footlockers. But Scourge didn't need to see them to hunt them down. He could sense them through the force, trembling and sobbing silently, their minds numb with shock, and he stalked them one by one, breathing hard, not with exertion, but excitement. It was over in minutes. Only then, standing alone amid the bodies, did Scourge notice that the sounds of battle from below had ended. Moving quickly, he crossed the room and descended the staircase. The floor below was similar to the one above, except for a row of offices built along the east side of the building. There were no interior walls. The floor was stacked with crates and piled with supplies. Bodies were scattered everywhere. Most were Separatists, but Scourge noticed 3 or 4 wearing Nyrus's colors. The rest of Murtaugh's team were methodically searching the dead, looking for survivors to interrogate. Scourge shook his head. The greatest fear of any Separatist organization was betrayal from within. Only the 2 or 3 top people would know anything useful, and they would never have allowed themselves to be taken alive. Confident that the building was secure, he deactivated his lightsaber and clipped it onto his belt. Then he activated the comlink on his wrist. "All clear, Murtaugh. Get Sekal in here." "We're already inside," Murtaugh's voice came back to him. "Found their control center in some offices at the back." Scourge had to clench his teeth to keep from screaming with rage. He had given specific orders, and Murtaugh and Sekal had willfully disobeyed them. He made his way toward the offices with long, purposeful strides. As he approached, his anger gave way to suspicion. There had to be a reason they had defied him. Were they simply undercutting his authority, or was it something more sinister? Were they setting some kind of trap? As he drew near the offices, he saw both Sekal and Murtaugh huddled at a comm terminal. Surprisingly, there were no other members of Murtaugh's team nearby. Scourge approached cautiously, probing with the force to see if he could detect any immediate threat. Neither turned as he approached. Their attention was focused entirely on the comm. "Are there any others?" Murtaugh was asking. "Not that I can find," Sekal replied. "But I might be able to." "I gave you 2 in order," Scourge barked as he came up behind them. They both turned to face him. Murtaugh's lips were pressed tightly together, and he seemed to have gone pale. But Sekal seemed more amused than scared. "After you were gone, I realized a flaw in your plan," he said with an ingratiating smile. "If the Separatists had anything incriminating here in the base, they'd probably try to destroy it before we could get our hands on it. I told Murtaugh I might be able to salvage something if he could get me inside. But the longer we waited, the less chance we'd have to recover anything useful. Scourge didn't say anything, his eyes fixed on Sekal with a piercing glare. We would have tried to contact you, but you'd already started the mission. We didn't want to distract you. Do you take me for a fool? Scourge asked softly, his hand casually falling to the hilt of his lightsaber. Sekal's smile faded, and Scourge caught a hint of fear in his eyes. I don't normally disobey orders, Murtaugh said, jumping in to try to defuse the situation. But in this case, Sekal was right. Once the Separatists knew the battle was lost, they ran a cleaner program on their computers to erase all their data files. If we'd waited for your signal, everything would have been lost. Scourge let the hand drop from his weapon. Now was not the time to settle this. But it was one more thing Sekal would answer for once he finally got a chance to speak with him alone. What did you find? A recording of a recent communication, Sekal answered, pressing a button on the terminal. A ghostly blue, three-dimensional image crackled into being, hovering a few centimeters above the holocron. The frozen image was slightly under a meter in height, a perfect miniature of the speaker. Darth Cedric's, Scourge gasped. Most of the call was already erased by the cleaner program, Sekal explained. But I was able to save this. He hit another button and the recording began to play. It was obviously damaged. The image flickered in and out of focus, and the audio was plagued by bursts of static that cut off much of what was said. Latest failed attempt, Cedric said, his voice thin and crackling. Nearus is dangerous and must not be. Keep allegiances hidden. Stop the Emperor. Madness must end. Can you get anything more? Scourge asked. Not here, Sekal answered. Give me enough time and the proper equipment, and I should be able to come up with plenty. Tell your team to load up every terminal and data file they find, Scourge instructed Murtaugh. Nearus won't be pleased if we leave something important behind. Sekal didn't say anything, but Nearus's personal slave greeted them at the front door as the three arrived back at the palace. My mistress received your message, she said to Scourge. She wishes to speak to you at once. Get started on those data files as soon as Murtaugh's team finishes unloading them, he said to Sekal. Forgive me, my lord, the young Twi'lek said, her voice trembling slightly. Darth Nearus wants to speak to all three of you. Scourge glanced from the slave to Sekal and Murtaugh, wondering if they knew anything more than he did. They only shrugged. Let's go, Scourge said with a brisk nod. The Twi'lek turned and led them down the now familiar corridors to Darth Nearus's personal chamber. As she always did, the slave knocked once on the door and waited for acknowledgement from within. Enter, Nearus called. The slave opened the door and slipped to the side to allow Scourge, Murtaugh, and Sekal to crowd into the small room where Nearus sat at her computer terminal, looking as if she hadn't moved since the last time Scourge had seen her there. She flicked off the terminal, spun in her chair, and stood up. Is it true? She asked, not even bothering to greet them. Is Darth Cedric's a traitor to the Empire? We found a recording of a call from him at the Separatist base, Sekal said. They were obviously working with him. Despite the compelling evidence, Scourge wasn't fully convinced. Cedric's was human, which didn't sit well with some of the Sith pureblood families in the nobility of the Empire. Yet whatever petty prejudices he had endured in his life were insignificant compared with all he had achieved. Darth Cedric's was the longest-serving member of the Dark Council, having joined a full decade before Nearus. He had risen to the penultimate position in the Empire. And while Scourge could understand his desire to eliminate Nearus or other potential rivals, it was hard to imagine that he would be bold enough to challenge the immortal, all-powerful Emperor. Cedric's betrayal makes no sense, he said, feeling confident enough in his analysis of the situation to voice his opinion. It makes perfect sense if you know the man as I do, Nearus assured him. Cedric's is old and desperate. He knows his position has become vulnerable. Soon the Emperor will have no further use for him. In his arrogance, he thinks he can usurp the Emperor's position and save himself. That is why he plotted with the Separatists to assassinate me. He knows those of us currently on the Dark Council would oppose him in his bid for power. He seeks to replace us with new members who are weak and inexperienced. He thinks he will be able to manipulate them and seize control of the entire council, so that they will follow him when he finally moves against the Emperor. Her explanation made sense. He had seen firsthand how those in power became desperate when they sensed their positions were threatened. It won't be long before Darth Zedrix learns of the attack on Bosthirda, Neris continued. We must act quickly. I'm surprised the Emperor instructed you to deal with this, Scourge remarked. I'd have expected him to order the Imperial Guard to arrest Zedrix. The Emperor doesn't know, Neris said. Darth Zedrix has allied himself with separatists, Scourge insisted. He's a traitor to the Empire. It is our duty to report him. I don't think that would be the best plan, Sekal cautioned, ignoring Scourge and addressing Neris directly. We have little evidence, and your rivalry with Zedrix is well known. If we come forward with these accusations, he will simply deny them. The Emperor is unlikely to act without first gathering more proof. This will give Zedrix a chance to cover up his involvement or go into hiding. Sekal is right, Neris said. The element of surprise is our greatest advantage. Zedrix doesn't know we have exposed his treachery. If we strike now, we can catch him unprepared. It was obvious her mind was made up, and Scourge could follow the logic of her arguments. Yet, he still felt uncomfortable not reporting Edrix to the Emperor. An assault on his stronghold will be difficult, Murtaugh warned. We don't have the numbers to overwhelm his defenses, and I don't like hiring mercenaries for a job like this. Too much chance one of them will sell us out to Edrix. Perhaps assassination is the way to go, Setchel suggested. Do to him what he tried to do to you. We would need a particularly skilled and accomplished assassin, Neris said. She looked at Scourge. Do you think you can get close enough to Edrix? Scourge carefully considered all the variables before he replied. His first instinct was to propose an undercover operation, with him seeking a position on Edrix's personal staff. Over several weeks he could study the routines of his intended victim and all his servants, patiently waiting for a chance to catch him alone, unarmed and unprepared. But there were no Sith among Edrix's followers. Many Sith were prejudiced against humans. No doubt the Dark Counselor would never allow Sith too close to him, fearing they might one day turn on him. Scourge might be able to find some other way to infiltrate Edrix's inner circle, but as Neris had pointed out, they needed to act quickly. There wasn't time for a prolonged undercover mission. Inside his stronghold he is untouchable, he declared finally. There may be a way to lure him out, Setchel said. The Separatists seem to use coded communications whenever they contact Edrix. If I can replicate the code, I can send a message requesting an urgent meeting at some remote location. An ambush might work, Murtaugh agreed. Edrix won't want to draw attention to his treachery. At most he'll have 2 or 3 of his most trusted followers with him. With enough troops we should be able to take him down. No, Neris said, shaking her wizened head. Edrix would sense it coming. Whoever we send will have to hide his presence through the Force until Edrix walks into the trap. It was obvious whom she was referring to, but Scourge was still reluctant. Asking me to kill a member of the Dark Council is not as simple as you make it sound. I did not expect you to balk at this task, Neris said. He has committed treason. He brought this on himself. You misunderstand, Scourge said, choosing his words carefully. The human traitor deserves to die. But he is a Dark Lord of the Sith. Alone, what chance will I have against him? I should have known, Setchel said, grinning. You're afraid. Fighting a battle I can't win isn't brave, Scourge shot back. It's stupid. At least you have the courage to speak your mind, Neris said. You already have enough sycophants, Scourge replied, glaring at Setchel. Neris flashed one of her ghastly grins, sending a chill down Scourge's spine. Somehow he kept himself from shuddering. I think the 2 of us should continue this conversation privately, she said. Setchel and Murtaugh bowed and left without a word. Scourge was pleased to see they were chastened by their sudden exclusion. Neris didn't speak until the Twi'lek servant had closed the door behind them. You are right to be cautious, she said, but you underestimate your own abilities. Scourge's thoughts jumped back to the slaughter at the Separatist warehouse. He remembered the energy and exhilaration he'd felt. He could sense his power was growing. His connection to the dark side had never been stronger. But butchering poorly prepared soldiers was not the same as facing highly trained Sith. Edrix won't come alone. He'll have me outnumbered. Edrix surrounds himself with acolytes of the dark side. Your talent will let you feed on their power and turn it against them. The greater your opponent's connection to the Force, the stronger you become. Strong enough to kill a member of the Dark Council? Against me, you would stand no chance, Nyrus replied. But Edrix is old and infirm, and he is human. They are a lesser species. Over the decades, the dark side has exacted too great a toll on his body. He is a hollow shell of what he once was. He holds on to his current position only because of his cunning. His followers obey him without question, too frightened of his reputation to see how age has ravaged his flesh and left him weak. Neris paused, waiting for Scourge's response. He wasn't eager to offer one without carefully considering everything he had learned. He believed what Neris had told him about his own abilities. He had felt the truth of it in his most recent battles, but he wasn't ready to trust her. If Zedrix was really as weak as she claimed, she wouldn't need Scourge's help to eliminate him. The truth was, Scourge wanted to kill Zedrix. It wasn't just his loyalty to the Emperor, though he firmly believed the only fit punishment for treason was death. He wanted to test himself against a member of the Dark Council. He wanted to prove to himself and to Neris that he was worthy of this task. If Darth Zedrix fell to his hand, his name would be hailed and feared throughout the Empire. Neris would be indebted to him for eliminating her rival, and the Emperor would reward him for executing a traitor. It was unlikely he would be chosen to replace Zedrix on the Dark Council. Scourge was still too young, too unknown. He hadn't forged the necessary political alliances or built up a cadre of servants and followers. Yet, this would be a bold first step. It would make his name known in the halls of power. And when another vacancy opened on the council down the road, in 5 years or maybe 10, he would be the leading candidate. "Tell Sekal to set up the meeting," he said. Neris smiled again, but this time Scourge didn't find it so unnerving. Instead, he found himself wondering if it would be her he replaced when he finally ascended to his rightful position.